how to solve giant problems, make a giant difference, and make giant money with the #1 healthcare investor in the world, Bryan Roberts. All right. What did Joey Ramone say? He said, hey ho, let's go. Welcome to the podcast Silicon Valley Needs, Legends and Losers, where we aspire to have authentic dialogues that inspire you to design a legendary business and a legendary life. And somewhere along the way, we don't chase a lot of rabbits down zebra holes. All right, today we've got an incredible show. I'm stoked you're with us. We have one of the smartest people I know, a guy named Bryan Roberts. And Bryan is a man who wants to make a giant difference in the world and giant returns for his investors. He's a senior partner at the legendary venture capital firm in Silicon Valley, Venrock. And most people consider Bryan to be the #1 healthcare technology investor on planet Earth. So he's coming up on today's show. Now, right off the top, I want to say that our hearts are aching for Texas. I know all of you feel the same way. When we turn on our TVs, we fire up our browsers, we see the videos. If you have friends and family in Texas, as I do, I was communicating with some friends who live in the Houston area over the last couple of days. Just terrible. So I just wanted to say we're sending our love and our prayers and our thoughts to the Lone Star State, and we're also sending our money. We wrote a pretty reasonably sized check, and I'm going to ask those of you who are in a position to help, because if those of us who are in a position don't help our fellow Americans in this time of need, then who will? So I ask you to join me and help our friends in Texas. Also want to say a huge thank you off the top. You have made us one of the top business shows on Podbean. And you may know Podbean is one of the leading platforms for podcasts. And they're the first place, actually, we host Legends and Losers, and then it goes out from there. And so, it's the 6-month anniversary of Legends and Losers. We've been on since February. And there we are. So I can't thank you enough. The show means a tremendous amount to me. As I think most of you know, it's an absolute labor of love. And so to think that 6 months in, I've been able to have some incredible dialogues with some amazing people, and also had a ton of fun being completely silly and ridiculous. And B, the emails, the tweets, the reviews that you guys write, they make all the difference, because, we're not like a TV show. We don't really get ratings. We get very little data. And so our biggest indication that we're making any kind of a difference are the emails that you send, the iTunes reviews, the tweets and the LinkedIns and the whatever. So all of that then leads us to Podbean saying that we're one of the top business shows on their platform. And so I can't thank you enough for sharing the show, and I ask you to keep doing it. Now, I have to shout out to my new buddy, Agent Kevin Miller. Kevin is the host of The Ziglar Show, and Zig Ziglar is one of my absolute business heroes, and I had the incredible pleasure of being on the Ziglar podcast with Kevin and Mark Timms, the new CEO of the Ziglar Company. And we had a blast. It was one of the most powerful category design conversations I've had, particularly because Kevin and Mark and the other businesses they're involved with have gotten really into category design. And so they read Play Bigger, and they've been working on it for their own businesses. And so, and I spent some time with Kevin talking about that stuff. And so what all that meant was we were able to get into the meat of category design in a way that is pretty unusual, because Kevin himself and Mark himself, they're entrepreneurs and executives who are working on category design. So I'd ask you to check out episode 479 of The Ziglar Show if you want to hear all that stuff. And if you don't listen to The Ziglar Show, Zig Ziglar taught me to sell when I was a kid. And man, it's just, when you listen to the podcast, you have Zig in your life, you have Kevin in your life, they have great guests. It's a great show. Check it out. All right, Bryan Roberts, he has at least 9, as of last count, companies in his personal portfolio at Venrock that are worth $1 billion or more. And he's been investing in healthcare technology companies for approximately 20 years. He's a senior partner at the legendary Venrock in Palo Alto, California. Bryan Roberts is really the man. He really is. He's been in Fortune. He's been in Forbes. He's been in TechCrunch. He's been in Business Insider, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. And here he is on Legends and Losers. So, Bryan, tell me something legendary.
Legendary. Legendary is, in my world, legendary is doing stuff that the rest of the world thinks won't work.
Now, why do you love to do stuff that the rest of the world doesn't think is going to work?
Because what's the fun in doing stuff? What's the fun in succeeding at stuff that the rest of the world thinks will work? Like that's just what everybody does, right? I don't know. For forever, I've been a problem solver. I'm not a communicator. I'm not a supporter. I'm a problem solver, right? Like from whatever long ago. And solving problems is way more fun if those problems are super hard and they're non-consensus, that you can get it done.
You know, one of the things, and I quote you all the time, Bryan, I don't know if you remember saying this in our book, Play Bigger, but you said, oh, by the way, I'm getting an incredibly awesome shot of your head right now.
My bald spot? Yeah, there you go.
So in our book, I don't know if you remember saying this, but you said things go from non-consensus to consensus fast.
Yeah. And unpredictably. Like, I never know when. Like, I feel like on lots of stuff that works, lots of companies that I've been involved with that have worked, like, I spend years sitting there going, this is awesome. Like, the whole world should want to use this. And I'm like freaking Don Quixote in the middle of the desert tilting at windmills until something happens. And then the whole world's like, oh yeah, this is awesome. I can never predict what that tipping point is.
And so, but in a lot of ways, wouldn't you say you're in the business of making tipping points like that happen?
I am in the business of finding really good people and helping them attack big, interesting problems. And it's interesting. Most of the time, like when we make an investment that I get involved with, usually the people work out pretty well. Usually the big problem turns out to be an interesting big problem. And usually the approach that we took to the big problem when we invested in it doesn't work.
So say more about that. I love it.
Well, I think it turns out to suggest that I'm decent at people and problems, and man, do I suck at evaluating products, right?
And how does category sort of fit in people, problem,
well, I think category and problem are in the same genre, right? Like you and look, I get way more excited. This goes back to the problem solving thing. Like I get way more excited about attacking problems and categories that people don't recognize as either interesting or solvable today, right? Like doing the N+1 iteration of something, well, you can build big businesses doing that. Like it just doesn't jazz me up. And it took me a long time. I figured out that I am both very intellectually selfish and super lucky, right? Like, and the lucky part is that I can express my complete intellectual selfishness in a way that keeps me employed and allows me to do some decent stuff in the world, right? Because I like to solve problems. It's great.
And do you ever feel like you just live in some sort of a shit sandwich of problems because you really do. If you look at healthcare by way of example, I mean, you are in the belly of the beast of one of the biggest problems in our world today. And there's got to be a mass amount of frustration as you clearly find more stuff that doesn't work than works.
Dude, I have no reason for existence if I'm not within the shit sandwich, right? Like there's no, like, if there's not ambiguity and uncertainty and problems, like, A, nobody needs me. So why would you put up with my personality if you didn't actually need me? Number one. And number two, I'd be bored, right? Which would make me even more of a pain in the ass in, trying to help people solve stuff. Like I don't actually get awake and interested until there's real ambiguity and uncertainty. If the path is pretty well set, I'm like the worst incarnation of an ADD wolf in a trap.
So if the problem is super clear and the category is already starting to emerge and people are coalescing around it and the product/solution is starting to really take form and all that.
I should have done it 5 years ago.
Yeah. And so when you just live in the nothingness then, right?
Right. You got it. Absolutely. It's an awesome place. It's super interesting.
And so how do you, if you're living in the awesomeness of nothing, how do you figure out what's a good nothing, that is to say a nothing worthy of spending time on, versus, a nothing that's a bunch of people that are nothings, and a category that's a nothing, and a problem that's a nothing, and you go, fuck, this is a lot of nothing.
In all honesty, I crowdsource that, right? And yes, there's some filtering and there's some discussion that goes on. I would not tell you that I think that I come up with all of the great ideas of companies I invest in and people I invest with, right? I am in the very fortunate position of being able to sit in the middle of a big, fast-flowing intellectual stream, right? With great people who have terrific ideas and are spending all their time on these ideas, right? And also, happily, in addition to sitting in the intellectual stream, I honestly, I get graded on what I do. Like, I don't get graded particularly on the stuff I miss. So I'm sure I missed, I'll give you an example of stuff I missed. I have been invited to invest at the early stages in 2 hugely successful healthcare companies in China. I passed on both of them. I was a dumbass about it, right? Like, I should have done it. But I missed them, right? And that's okay, right? Like, you'd love to have all of them, right? But I'd much rather get 50% of the great ones and have fewer total disasters that, take a decade to get my ass out of and millions of dollars, than to be in all of the great ones and a whole slew of crud.
Yeah, I mean, your strategy, Bryan, appears to be different than some others in the VC game, in that you are not spraying and praying, best I can tell, right?
No, I am not. In fact, we do, with all of the surplus of capital out there, right, which we could have a super interesting discussion on how permissive the ecosystem is and how little Darwinian pressure there is out there in the world that we live in today. We're doing a lot of really early stage seed investing, and very popular today in the seed world is what I sort of call the party seed round, right? Like 5 venture capitalists all get together and put $250K each into some company's seed, which means that none of the venture capitalists give a rat's ass about what goes on because they don't have enough money invested. And frankly, I think the entrepreneur looks at it as a totally free option, right? And no commitment. And so we've done a bunch of seeds, and speaking for myself only, I will just do seeds where we can actually really get involved and do a bunch of the round, because it's not worth it otherwise.
Because A, you want to care, and B, because you're not a spray and pray. It reminds me a little bit of, I think it was Mark Twain, the Mark Twain quote, where he said, put all your eggs in one basket and watch that basket.
That's right, exactly. And give a shit about the basket. That's right.
Yeah. And the other thing I find incredibly unique about you, Bryan, is unlike a lot of VCs, you actually get, in many cases, or in some cases, you tell me, deeply involved with the founding of the company, with the creation of the idea. You're very entrepreneurial in a way that seems different. Could you kind of open that up for me?
Sure. Sure. So I think that's true. So if you think about the venture world as venture as investors trying to work on the front end of the funnel, right? Deal awareness and deal access and winning deals. And then the part of the effort that is post-investment, right? Working with the company and stuff like that. I definitely skew towards the working with the company and working with the entrepreneurs. Part of it is I'm a really crappy networker. Like I hate that stuff. It's just fucking terrible as far as.
Why do you hate networking?
Because I am the worst small talk person ever. Like you can see it on my face, right? I'm like, oh, we're not talking about anything. I have like other things I could be doing. I don't really want to be here anymore.
It's funny that you say that because I'm an extrovert, is pretty obvious. And most people, I think, assume, Bryan, that extroverts like networking and all that stuff, going to TED and, Davos and all that. I hate that shit too. I can't do it. Like I went to TED a handful of times and I stopped going. I mean, I find it interesting, but I'd rather pick what I see online because I don't want to do that schmoozing. And, I remember a little while ago, I saw a Quora question that said something to the effect of, how do I network with VCs? And my response was, don't fucking network with VCs. Only call a VC when you have something to fucking talk to them about that's valuable. But if you call, you ever get this call or this email, oh, I'd like to network with you.
Yeah, right.
I want to punch him in the face. Like, network with me about fucking what? Is that how it is for you?
Yeah, for sure. Right. I'm so much happier and therefore better. Like, I think all of us are just, better at stuff we're happy about. Like, I'm so much happier with substantive one-on-one discussions about something that's really interesting and we can puzzle over, rather than like in healthcare, there's this like JP Morgan meeting every January. That's like the big confab, and it's just water torture death, right? You see so many people and you see them there every year, and every year they come here like, I'd love to do a deal with you this year. Like, I'll see you again next year. You can say the same thing. Forget it. But anyway, so back to the spending time with companies, right? Like that's the stuff I love. And it's fascinating to me because that combined with being a really crappy networker means that I tend to form a narrow number of really strong, respected relationships, and then be ambivalent to the breadth of stuff, which I think is, as you suggest, is very different than lots of the investors out there in the world. I think a lot of investors much of venture has evolved its way towards this top of funnel activity, right? The deal awareness, the deal access, the winning the deals. And what that leads to is pretty reasonably entrepreneurs saying, well, the most important thing I got from my venture capitalist was money. Well, of course that's true if they spent all their fucking time at the top of the funnel, right? And then you never saw them after they gave you the money. The money was actually the last transaction that happened. Which I don't know which is a better strategy, but I'm not really good at the first one, so I might as well stick with mine.
Yeah. And it's so true that what a venture capitalist, I think, needs to bring is way more, of course, than money. And, I've certainly been on boards, I'm sure you have, where you sit there and whether it's a VC or somebody else, the board member looks at the CEO, entrepreneur, and we're having some discussion about whatever it is. And, some equivalent of, well, I think what we should do is decrease expenses and increase revenue. And you're like, really? I mean, maybe they don't say it quite so stupidly, but you know what I mean, where the shit that comes out of their mouth is like completely useless to an entrepreneur who's facing some giant challenge, whether it's a good challenge, a bad challenge, or somewhere in between. And so it's an interesting thing to me, Bryan, that you have focused on, for lack of a better word, substance over style.
Well, okay, so let's be clear though. Like, if I could find my way to a set of investments where I could give somebody money and then go away for 5 years and then show back up and have 10x my money, that would be a better business model. Let's just admit that to ourselves. But given I've already told you, I actually apparently suck at evaluating specific products. And And so most businesses that I get involved with change something. It's not true for all of them. Like there's a handful of them where what we invested in worked out great. But the majority of them, there's pivots along the way. That requires some time.
Yeah. Well, speaking of time, I read something about you. I don't know if it was Fortune or Forbes or one of the articles that you're in a lot, but where you said, if I remember this right, your average time on a board is 12 years. Did I read that right?
You could just insert long ass into that. Yes.
And so that's different, right? What's the average time an early investor's on a board? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I would tell you, I think healthcare stuff takes longer. Number one. Two, like I'd be interested to get your opinion. I think it takes a decade to build a decent product. Like you can get lucky before that. Like you can hire some people for a couple of years and do some product development for a couple of years and sell a business 5 years or 6 years in, but you're getting lucky. Like you don't actually have a really feature robust product 5 or 6 years in, right? It takes a decade. And that assumes you don't screw up a couple of things.
I think that's right, especially if you say to create like a really truly great product, like a product that is bomb proof. Like I look at this technology we're using right now, Zoom, and we had Eric Yuan on Legends and Losers, the founder of Zoom, and he's an amazing guy. They're $1 billion valuation startup. This is an amazing technology. I use it every day. And yeah, will it be a more bomb-proof, solid product? I forget exactly how old they are. I think they're 6 or 7 years old. So they're getting close. But I think that's right, especially if they don't over-feature it.
Mm-hmm.
You know that there's that famous Yogi Berra quote where he says that restaurant's so busy no one goes there anymore.
Yeah.
And I often think, that product is so feature-rich, no one uses it anymore.
Yeah, so getting to the simplicity on the other side of complexity is an art form.
And in the healthcare world, in the biotech world, et cetera, the bomb-proofness, if you will, if that's even a word, of the product is more important than in some other spaces, right?
For sure, right? You, the penalties for screw-ups are higher. You also, frankly, have, you also have the sales cycles of sort of the slowest enterprise, tech companies. And then you have regulatory, and you have an industry that has really cruddy margins for most everybody outside pharma. Like nobody else makes any
You're
money.
making it sound attractive for young investors to get into healthcare.
No, I hope not. I hope they all go somewhere else.
And so, given all of that, Bryan, why are you so passionate about health and healthcare and all of that?
It's an enormous industry. It has grown up over 50 or 70 years under a set of rules that are now changing. And that spells opportunity and ambiguity, right? So there's a large pool to swim in. That pool was created under one set of rules, and the rules are now evolving. You also have a bunch of technology that's permeated a bunch of other industries that now is beginning to be applied into health. I mean, let's be clear. It was only 5 or 6 years ago that most doctors' offices got wired up, right? Before that.
5 or 6 years ago? What do you mean wired up?
Like electronic medical records. Before that, every doctor's office really had a bunch of folders in a back room filled with paper. Like there's nothing you can do if all your data and information's on paper.
And so why such late adoption of technology? I mean, paper.
Yep.
What the fuck?
So I think you had a variety of things. One, much of the healthcare industry on the delivery side were small businesses. Okay, they didn't have they didn't have the infrastructure.
You mean like the local doctor's office,
Yeah,
that kind of thing?
exactly. You got it, right? Everybody else has literally somewhere between -5 and positive 5% net margins. So they don't have any reserve for let's go invest in things, right? It's all about like, how do I not lose money this year? And that's true for the insurance companies. It's true for the big health systems, et cetera. And then you had docs who were not tech savvy. And all that changed with the High Tech Act in 2010-ish, right? And so you've all of a sudden gotten much more liquidity in the data and information recently. And that's attracted a whole new slate of entrepreneurs from the tech side. Like you talk to tech entrepreneurs who are like, oh, I just done some interesting stuff. I'm really amped up about what I want to do next. The two big problems of our time are viewed as healthcare and education.
But it seems like, yeah, I mean, that's a powerful statement and hard to argue. I mean, if you look at it as a simple level, at a society level, like what do we want? We want our people to be healthy. We want, when they get sick or have an accident, to have a way to take care of them. And we want really fucking smart people in our country and in our world, right?
Yeah.
I mean, is it that simple at that level?
Yeah, I think so. And I think both of those industries have been very late adopters of technology, right? So like to really scare you, we had the economy went super south in late 08, beginning of 09. The US overall lost like 9 million jobs. There's that, very categorical chart of like quarterly job gains and losses that show we just lost jobs for like 2 or 3 years. If you look at that chart for the healthcare industry, they gained jobs every quarter nonstop through the whole time.
It's amazing. I have, for whatever reason, I seem to have collected this. I don't mean this to sound the way it might, but I seem to have collected a bunch of nurses in my life. Anyway, when I talk to my nurse friends, what they tell me is there are not enough nurses. We're not, and at that level, it's like very basic. Where are the people who can do the on the ground, in the office, in the hospital care? They're not sort of showing up the way they used to in a profession like nursing, where there was a point in time, I don't know, you tell me, not that long ago, where a profession like that, there were more people that wanted to be in it than there were jobs, and it seems like that has flipped. Is that right?
I'm not convinced there are fewer people wanting to go into those endeavors. What I do believe is true is that the healthcare has had a we'll throw bodies at the problem approach rather than let's be smart about it, right? Let's use technology to leverage it, data to leverage, et cetera. It's been let's throw bodies at the problem. And they're just like, healthcare is now mid-teens of our GDP. Like you just can't keep, like if you're going to throw bodies at that, you can't keep up with it.
Well, and it grows as an expense for businesses, you tell me, but as I remember, in a very upward trajectory and in a very unpredictable one. Some years it can be 2% increase in healthcare insurance, and sometimes it can be 8%, and there seems to be no rhyme or reason. And if I'm GE or I'm a small, medium-sized business, I just gotta pay that cost and keep going. Is that right?
So it is absolutely true that for a long time, large companies in general, the people who pay for healthcare have treated healthcare sort of like the weather, right? Like, oh, look, there's a hurricane next week. We'll let the hurricane run through and then we'll see what the damage was, right? And healthcare is now, for those institutions, it's like the last great unmanaged line item in a company's income statement, right? Like people, they do procurement, they do travel and entertainment expense, they like everything they track, they have rules, and they follow, and they know what's going on. And healthcare, which is a huge line item for these businesses, like it's a retrospective analysis. And one of the things that is going to help us get a handle on all this stuff is that changing. But you've got to, it's got to become important to the CFO and the CEO rather than just the head of benefits.
Yeah. So could you take me forward 10 years? Let's say it's 10 years from now and everything you know about the industry and technology and how everything's changing. What's your best guess, Bryan, as to what healthcare might look like 10 years from today?
Sure. So I think that I think there will have been a dramatic increase in the use of data and technology to help people, to help patients, okay, get the most effective, efficient care. Okay. It will be, it'll range from as simple as you, Chris, need to go get an x-ray, and you go get that x-ray at the corner imaging center rather than at the big health system, where the big health system gets paid like 3x what the imaging center gets paid, right? And you'll be able to get your x-ray will get sent wherever to your doc, right? Like there's no benefit to going to the big health system for that x-ray versus the corner imaging center. It will go to, there will in a decade, lots more of every patient's care will be done in a lower acuity setting with more frequency. So if you have a chronic disease, you'll be taking some of your physical attribute values, whether it's your blood pressure or your glucose, you'll be doing it at home, right? And some machine learning driven algorithms will be monitoring the data that comes off you and surfacing it to a live human once something looks out of whack, right? So you'll dramatically both improve the level of service for the individual. Like how happy would you be if, you didn't have to take your mom who's got, 4 chronic diseases to the freaking doctor twice a week, and it could
way happy.
Yeah, right, exactly, right? Like everybody saves time, right? To a bunch of telemedicine, like a bunch of virtual medical visits, whether it's with a person or with algorithms, it'll just become way more efficient along a variety of axes.
Yeah, yeah. And we can begin to see that happening now for sure. What other big things do you see plus or minus 10 years down the road?
I think in 10 years, we will actually finally really have a handle on genomics. Like we sequenced the genome nearly 20 years ago.
Yeah, what, 98, 99 time frame?
Yeah, just around the turn of the century. And I think people spent a while thinking, oh, wow, cool, we solved that problem. Good stuff. And I think we've now figured out just how little we know about it. And so while many people, and there's a lot, like lots of people love to sort of equate biology and drug discovery to sort of the semiconductor industry, where like it's a very multivariate, large data problem. The hitch today is, in biology, it's an unbounded problem. Like we actually don't know what we don't know yet. Whereas on the semiconductor side, it's a bounded problem. You just, you got to crunch a lot of data, but you can get there. And in 10 years, my hope is we've increased our knowledge of all this stuff from the 10% of biology that we know now to something that gives us a better handle on figuring out novel approaches to disease, not just being sort of a stab in the dark and sort of de novo discovery, but a much more directed endeavor.
Yeah, that makes sense. I got a crazy question for you, and I've been actually dying to ask this of you for a long time. if
Let's
this
go.
is if this is stupid, then you just tell me. You won't be the first person to tell me I'm stupid. So if you go back to when the genome was mapped, and I remember being incredibly excited at the time, Craig Ventner, the whole thing, right? And the thing that excited me as a kid who was growing up in the tech world was this aha that our genome, and therefore the essence of life, is essentially software code. And that when when a tree drops an apple, that is a line in the code, an if-then statement, so to speak, that says when the apple gets to such and such a place of maturity, drop it. And so when life does what it does, it's actually software executing, the biology of software executing its program, so to speak. And if you believe that analogy, and tell me in a second if you believe it, when I sort of heard that, and I heard Craig Ventner talk, and I don't know if you know who Juan Enriquez is, but him talk about all that shit, I was like, wow. And I spent a bunch of my life at this place called Mercury, and one of the things we did was software testing, and you'd find a bug, and you'd fix the bug, and everything would be great. And we did that on the production side too, where we all know what it's like. A piece of software is working one day, we turn it on the next day, it's not. What the fuck happened? We find the bug, we fix the bug, and the software works again. So with all that said, what the thought I had was, well, the minute we understand how to connect software to our genomics, to our biology foundation, we can essentially fix the bug in the code, recompile the code, and ta-da, I don't have cancer anymore. Is that a dumb idea? Is that are people doing that to sort of elaborate on that concept for me, or is that not the way I should look at it?
Look, it is not a dumb idea. And I think that's what a lot of the world, that was the vision of a lot of the world, and a vision of what people called systems biology was the sort of moniker for it. Soon after the genome got decoded. The hitch is, it's like trying to run current software on that first 128K Mac. Like there's so much shit we don't know. It's so underpowered for it.
Or like those original personal computers, when you think how much user experience and user design and interfaces changed, right? When you used to turn on a computer and what you got was that fucking C-DOS prompt.
Right. Exactly.
You're like, you have to type in WP to make WordPerfect run or whatever, right?
Right. Well,
so that's where we're at, or are we punch cards, or?
Yeah, no, like we're somewhere between punch cards and the 128K RAM notion. And what we got to do is get to the iPhone 8 in terms of knowledge. And it's not just UI, like it's fundamental understanding, because you've got DNA goes to RNA, goes to proteins. Proteins have not only like their amino acid sequence structure, but have tertiary structure, right? And then you take that same genome and you put it into each cell, right? And different shit gets turned on and off in each cell, and then they interact, right? Like it's just such a vastly more complex problem that we don't have any clue, really.
And it feels like to me, and I'm not very sophisticated about this or anything for that matter, but that part of the problem is, if you will, whack-a-mole, right? In that we think if we do X to solve Y, then we'll be good. But X and Y live in this ecosystem called our body, which lives in the world. And so we fix one thing and then maybe we break another, or so forth and so on. And so there's this corollary thing that seems to be going on. And so I guess my question is what you're saying, Bryan, is we don't understand the whole picture. We may understand how to deal with a certain small part of it, but it's the interrelationships and the ecosystem that our bodies live in, et cetera? Or how should I think about that?
Yeah, that's right. So you've just defined for me the unbounded problem. Like if you do A in order to impact B and some other shit happens, by definition, the problem is unbounded. You don't understand enough about the system yet to be able to push on something and have something else happen.
My favorite ad on TV right now is there's a guy who looks like he's plus or minus our age, and he's at a construction site, and he can't shit. And the reason he can't shit is because he's on opioids. And the ad is for some drug, I don't even know what the drug is, that is for opioid users who can't shit to make them shit. And I just watched that and I go, first of all, I think two things. Number one, if you're the, let's call it 50-year-old actor, imagine you've been struggling your whole life to be an actor and your big break is the construction guy who can't shit ad. Fuck, what a bummer. I feel terrible for that guy. But I digress. The real issue is this one, which is, okay, we have opioids to deal with pain, right? And pain's a very real thing. And despite a lot of negativity around opioids, pain management's a very serious thing and makes a big difference to a lot of people, myself included at various times in the past. But it's sort of funny that solution equals unintended problem, which equals new solution. And I got to believe there's some unintended problem from the make you shit pill because of your opioids. I don't know what that is, but the long list of terrifying things at the end of the ad begins to spell it out.
Yeah, right.
So is that really it? Is this sort of this weird, we don't know how everything connects?
Yeah, for sure. On, nearly every place. Like we don't live in a world where if you get sick, there's a drug that won't have side effects, right? Like they're not Skittles.
Yeah. And, in some cases, I have a diagnosed but unknown and unnamed neurological muscular condition. And it essentially means my neurology won't leave my muscles alone. And the symptom I have is I have horrible cramping. And as I've gotten older, it's gotten worse. And so blah, blah, yada, yada. They figure all this shit out. And they put me on a epilepsy drug called Kamarzabingabang. I don't know what it's got some long fucking name. And the great news for me to the point of side effects is, so far so good. They test my liver every year. My doctor tells me my liver's fine, which I can't quite believe because I've been trying to kill it since I was 14. But, and so, yeah, some of us get lucky where we take this thing, it solves our problem. And at least so far it's in a manageable range, but that's almost never the case. And even when it's in a manageable range, they got to make sure my liver isn't going to blow up.
Well, yeah. And for you, like for that drug, whatever Kamarzabingabang is, like there will be some portion of the population out there where it doesn't really work very well, right? And there'll be some portion of the population where there is some side effect. And that's the heterogeneity of the genetics, right? Your body may process that drug faster or slower, et cetera. And that's the stuff we just don't know enough about yet.
Right. And then, of course, in Silicon Valley, in the tech world right now, a lot of people are excited about AI, machine learning, the Internet of Things, and the data science underneath that. How do you think, are those, the relevancy of those things in your world, and B, to which the degree to which they are relevant? How do you think about those giant tech megatrends as they kind of come into healthcare?
Yeah. So there's a lot of applicability of all of those advances in healthcare, right? Like if you have an enormous industry that's just relied on labor for a long time, like that sort of shit can be awesome. The question is specifically, where do you apply it and how do you get paid for it? Because again, you're living in an industry where nobody makes enough money. And so
even with the cost of healthcare being so fucking high, what do you mean?
Because you're putting dinner on a lot of people's tables, right? Like it's all
because we have so many people working in healthcare.
Exactly, right? And look, we're entering a world where there's going to be an oversupply of hospital beds, and hospitals are going to close, and that's going to be traumatic.
Are hospitals the new shopping mall?
It's a reasonable analogy. The one I've used historically is like the old army base closures of a decade ago that were so much angst, right? You just didn't need as many army bases. And I think it's true, you don't need as many shopping malls either, right? And so how you get paid to bring advances into an industry that's very tight on margins is always a challenge.
Yeah, that one's fascinating, and it's also the other thing that's going through my head as you're talking is, how do you deal with an industry that is a do-gooder industry that in many countries, of course, is completely funded or mostly funded by the government, versus here in the as I lovingly refer to it, the excited states, where we have a profit motive, and of course there's good and bad to both motives, right? So in a world where you've got sort of this, a profit motive here primarily in the U.S. and a do-good motive primarily run by governments elsewhere in the world, how do you sort of think about navigating all of that complexity?
Yeah. Again, people love to take one side or the other of that debate. I would tell you, I think it's very gray. Okay. Like, yes, healthcare costs less in a bunch of other countries. Yes, a bunch of it is done through rationing of healthcare, right? Like, you need to get a surgery done. There's only X people who do it. The wait's 9 months. Sit on your ass and wait.
It's interesting, having grown up in Canada and living here now and being able to experience the two systems. The net of it, and probably oversimplistically in my head, is if you're a middle class to lower person economically, it's way better to get sick in Canada. And if you have financial resources beyond sort of the average maybe person, it's way better to get sick here.
Yeah.
And so and I find that kind of a bummer, right? Because I want to live in a world where when any of us get sick or hurt, we take care of each other. But I don't know how you deal with it to get to there.
Yeah. So I think that there is a wonderful trend over the last handful of years towards primary care doctors taking what's called global capitated risk.
Global
risk. So
yeah.
rather than just getting paid for a patient to show up and do something to them, you take responsibility for a patient for the year, and you get paid X dollars. If it costs you more than X dollars to give them the care, then it comes out of your pocket. If it takes less, you make money.
That's the program I've been on with my primary care doc, really since I moved to California.
Yeah, and so the big pool of that is in Medicare and Medicaid, right, where the government's paying for it anyway, and if they can create a win-win between the payer for the healthcare and the provider of the healthcare, right, where the provider of the healthcare has to give good care, but has a financial incentive to make that care efficient, right? You can dramatically improve the care for lower and middle income chronically ill people. There's a group called ChenMed on the East Coast, Southeast of the US, doing a great job at this. And today,
are they one of your investments?
No, it's actually a family. It started as a family business, a family primary care doc practice in Florida, who for whatever reason started to get into we actually care about the whole patient over time. And now it's become a big business. But the amazing thing is when you have ownership of these sorts of things, like no longer at 5 p.m. do you turn on the voicemail machine in your practice and say, hey, this is Dr. So-and-so, it's after 5 p.m., please go to the ER.
Right. And I'll tell you, having had the personal experience, with my doctor, Dr. Kathy Halston, the fact that I can send her a text or an email right now and say, Dr. Kathy, this is up, that's incredible. Even more incredible when it became clear to me that something was really wrong with this condition that I have, and I really needed to get into it. I wrote her a fairly long email. I explained to her exactly what was going on, and she knew somewhat, but I don't think she got sort of the level at which it was really a problem in my life. Anyway, she was my advocate, Bryan.
Mm-hmm.
And we went from specialist to specialist and test to test and Stanford and, UCSF but she's the person sort of saying, hey, Christopher matters. This is a big problem for him. And together we're going to find this solution. And I had a very, very profound experience of what it means to have an extraordinary doc in Dr. Halston.
Have a guide.
Yes. And fucking call people and say, hey, listen, you know, we need this and we need that, and this thing's not working. And what about that? And I need to find the person who can do this, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When you have a doctor like that, it's life-changing. It was life-changing for me.
Yeah. So I think you will see a lot more of that over the next decade, because not only was it life-changing for you, but if you have a guide, if you have an advocate, right, who will shepherd you, right, through whatever healthcare journey you happen to have at that point in time, you'll get better care. You'll also get much more efficient care, because no longer will you, like today, you know, people have a healthcare problem. One, they're freaked out, right? Like you're not in super logical, rational discovery mode, right? It's not like, oh shit, I want to buy a new TV, you know, let me go figure this out. You're freaked, right? And so you go to your primal lizard brain and be like, okay, I got to solve this problem like as quickly as possible. Like, what am I going to do? I'm going to call my sister who's a GI doc, or my buddy who's an oncologist or something, and like just beg them to help me and solve the problem. Or I'm just going to go show up at the ER.
Or I'm going to spend my life on WebMD, and now I self-diagnose myself with 15 other fuck things, right?
Right, exactly. Right. If you have a go-to person to contact, right, for the small and the big, it makes it a much more logical, efficient process.
Yeah. And so you think technology enables that more personalized advocacy kind of care?
I think it's a combination. I think it's a combination of technology and, honestly, economic incentives.
Right. And then as you think about the future, Bryan, what are you most excited about? I'm most excited about, okay, I guess the stuff we've talked about already. I'm super excited about both us getting to the next cusp of understanding of biology and genomics and what we can do with that, and taking that and all of the technology stuff and applying it to the healthcare delivery system, which, you know, is sort of still back in the buggy whip era for all intents and purposes. I love it. And before we kick out of this wave, Bryan, is there anything else you'd like to add or say?
No, it's fun. Thank you.
I can't thank you enough, first of all, for this awesome dialogue. And second of all, you've been a wonderful friend and partner to me for many, many years. And I don't know what I did to deserve that relationship, because I'm definitely not worthy. But I just can't thank you enough for your friendship and your partnership over what now is many years. You're an unbelievable guy, an incredibly smart guy, and a very inspiring guy. And so I just really want to say thank you.
Oh, well, thanks. I appreciate it. I hope my mom listens. She'll be so happy.
Well, Mom, Bryan done great. Bryan done legendary. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks. I'll talk to you later.
We'll talk soon. Be legendary. Whew. Bryan Roberts. That guy's got to get some kind of a neck brace to hold his head because his brain is so big. Awesome. Awesome. And look, let me brag a little bit. There are just not very many places in the world where you can go and hang out in a conversation with a guy like that. So thank you, Bryan. Thank you for sharing your awesome self. And hey, Legends Losers is awesome. So if you know somebody who would love this dialogue with Bryan, share it with them right now, please. We'd love it if you checked us out at legendsandlosers.com, our beautiful website, and subscribe there. And that way you will never miss anything from us, including special episodes, all of our normal episodes, and any other hilarity or losery that we've got up our sleeves. Also, I told you about Podbeam earlier. The other really cool thing about Podbeam, they have a great podcast app. And it's a great, great user interface and user experience, and I'd recommend it. So check out Podbeam's podcast app. And thanks again for making us a top show. Also want to let you know I'm on tour with our friends at NetSuite. The Next Ready Business Tour, September 20th in Denver, 26th in Toronto, 27th in beautiful New York, and November 9th in the hot, sexy, fantastic Miami, Florida. For more information, send an email to blackhole@legendsandlosers.com, and we'll get your VIP invitation out. I just recently did one in San Diego. Shout out to everybody in San Diego. Man, did we have a good time. Holy cow. Incredible restaurant, great group of folks, great lineup of speakers, some very innovative businesses in San Diego. And the special feature that night was none other than Bill Walton, NBA living legend, television legend, and truly an American treasure. So great, great time in San Diego. Thank you, Jason Maynard and the entire team at NetSuite for having me there. And I can't wait to keep doing more of these. We would like to thank the Lone Star State of Texas. Let's everybody make a donation to a Texas charity you like, because if we don't help, who will? Equity Directory, connecting legendary startups to the talent and resources they need. HarperCollins Instant Classic, Play Bigger, how pirates, dreamers, and innovators create and dominate markets. Our good friends at onelifefullylive.org. Come and see us in Sacramento in October. Go to onelifefullylive.org for more information. Our good friends at Project Reload, the nonprofit connecting American veterans to business leaders. Check them out at projectreload.com, an extraordinary organization. Matthew Johnson and the good people at pursuingresults.com, producers of legendary podcasts, and this one, Interview Valet, podcast interview marketing. Get yourself on some podcasts. If you're a thought leader, get out in the world. Podcasts are where you want to be. Podcasts are the new black, interviewvalet.com. NetSuite, #1 in cloud ERP, netsuite.com. Come see us, Next Ready Business Tour. Category Design Advisors, working with leadership teams to dominate new categories at categoryadvisors.com. The incredible bestseller, No Barriers, A Blind Man's Journey to Kayak the Grand Canyon, by our friend and guest on episode 47, Eric Weinmeier. Rapid Media, legendary marketing in Australia at rapidmedia.com.au. The Garlic Marketing Show, a marketing podcast that doesn't suck, with Ian Garlic. We'd like to remind you that this oddcast is the sole property of the Legends and Losers Oddcast Network. Today's information is provided to you solely for informational purposes, and all rights remain disturbed. We want you to know that Legends and Losers was never tested on GMOs, and we must warn you, this oddcast is produced in a studio that does contain nuts. Legends and Losers may contain forward-looking statements, backward-looking statements, present-looking statements, and absolutely ridiculous statements. Support your local venture capitalist. Don't be lame. Get out of the passing lane. We love you, Dandy Candy. Never turn your back on the ocean. Always shower with a friend. And hey, man, be careful. There's a beverage here. Listen to Linkin Park. Leonard Cohen was right. And hey, Colin, this oddcast really ties the room together, doesn't it? Today, our deepest apologies go out to Kimberly Kardashian. Sorry, Kimmy. We just ran out of time for you. That's it, my friends. Thank you so much for being with us, and we'll see you again very soon on another episode of Legends and Losers.